When Martha Graham choreographed Appalachian Spring in 1944, U.S. soldiers were fighting overseas. Her dance celebrated an earlier sort of courage and grit, that of the pioneers who, sustained by their faith, domesticated the American wilderness. The work is as much about vast space and isolation as it is about a frontier wedding. The open fourths and fifths in Aaron Copland's music and the spare hint of a house designed by Isamu Noguchi enhance that feeling. The choreography presents the wilderness as something to be mastered and enclosed. And for some settlers, like Graham's bride, it's also full of dangers. The simple, uncluttered space conveyed in the dance makes it a perfect subject for film, given the camera's ability to dissect what it sees and alter points of view. The 1958 film of the dance, itself a pioneering enterprise, shifts the viewer's perspective, circling, framing, and singling out the work's 8 characters. The camera tactfully intrudes on their thoughts, while only occasionally moving in for close-ups. In comparing scenes from this film, directed and photographed by Peter Glushanek, with a 16mm movie of Appalachian Spring shot in 1944 or 1945 by a fixed camera during a performance in a theater, we can not only see how cinema techniques affect our understanding of the stage work, we can discern changes that Graham made in the actual choreography. We can also note that the costumes, redesigned for the company's 1954 tour, are fancier than the earlier clothes. Graham plays the bride in both films, accompanied in the original cast by Eric Hawkins as the husbandman, Mae O'Donnell as the pioneering woman, Merce Cunningham as the revivalist, and Nina Fonaroff, Pearl Lang, Marjorie Mazia, and Yuriko as his devoted followers. Let's look at 3 sequences from each film, 2 involving the husbandman and the pioneering woman, and the other Graham's second solo, and I'll highlight some of the differences. In the scene that follows the entrance of the characters, the pioneering woman of the original version shows a faith more certain, more mature than that of the revivalists' 4 ecstatic followers. When Mae O'Donnell bends deeply backward, she seems to be yielding to the weight of heaven. She's very present in this scene. Her bold steps form partial fences around the women and weave through them. You see her as tough, experienced. Her prayers seem drawn up from the earth. She too can be jaunty, even though her skips are stiffer and more contained than those of the 4. Her balances on one leg look rock solid, as if she could stay there as long as necessary. She sinks slowly, almost out of sight behind the husbandman at his fence, waiting there in prayer until the other women have finished exploding in joyful, reiterated amens. Her gestures, suggesting plowing, are almost inseparable from those denoting worship. Matt Turney is a very different sort of dancer. Tall, willowy, beautiful, airier in her movements. And casting her may have had some influence on the choreography. At some point between 1944 and 58, Graham simplified this scene, making it look more spacious. This pioneering woman responds instantly when the revivalist, here Bertram Ross, summons all to prayer. And though like O'Donnell, Turney frames and interacts with the four bonneted women, she's initially less involved. These big ground-covering hops, later performed with Turney opening her arms, become a motif, and they have a calming effect whenever she performs them. The camera loves her, and with reason. These skirt-swishing hops prefigure a later, lustier version of the steps that the husbandman bursts into. She repeats the phrase with a difference. By pulling in closer, Glushanek makes us briefly see that these frisky women, whom critic Edwin Denby likened to small wild animals that were not frightened away by people, are also individuals. Thanks in part to Glushanek's camera work, the pioneering woman becomes more mysterious, almost an earth goddess. At the point when O'Donnell simply runs around the four bonneted women, Turney shivers her hand behind each of them, as if to say, "You are all holy." And when she circles the husbandman and approaches the revivalist, she lifts her palms to catch blessings that may fall like rain. Her prayers are like questions, searches. This scene presents two startlingly different views of the relationship between the husbandman and the pioneering woman. After the revivalist's fire and brimstone sermon, Turney rushes forward as if to call down a sweeter blessing, and the husbandman follows her as if she were a guiding spirit. O'Donnell offers a sterner, comforting message, and her behavior toward the husbandman is much more specific, that of an aunt, say, or a mother. When Stuart Hodes as the husbandman, after a moment of doubt, kneels before the pioneering woman, and she opens her arms, signaling him to open his, she seems to be saying, "Don't wallow in guilt. God is forgiving." At the same point in the music, O'Donnell comes to hold Eric Hawkins from behind and jumps up and down with him. She sits on the steps. Does he bend to kiss her or whisper to her? The husbandman's boisterous jumps, more or less the same in both versions, elicit different responses. Turney approaches a very self-confident husbandman, and her gentle touch on his elbow brings to mind the way she blessed the four little women. O'Donnell takes the hand Eric Hawkins seems to extend to her, and together they repeat the straight-up jumps she has taught him. Hodes is on his own. Turney and Hodes end their communication with a formal bow and a curtsy. O'Donnell and Hawkins share a more intimate moment. He circling her on his knees, she bending back, God-struck, not seeing him, yet revolving in relation to him like a compass needle tracking true north. He expresses his gratitude with a suddenly emotional, even worshipful act. And Hawkins waves to O'Donnell. Turney doesn't even see Hoods. She's already out of the scene. In this solo, the bride envisions the terrors that may visit a woman setting up house so far from neighbors. What if she went into labor alone at night? In the earlier film, she makes you feel the wildness induced by fear. She rushes about, staggers. In addition to wearing a fashionable Sunday best dress in the 1958 film, Graham does fancier, more showy steps. Seen from a distant fixed perspective in the 40s film, the choreography suggests that the bride views the house as both a refuge and a frail defense against the wilderness. She sits, steps in, almost falls out the back, and rolls down the steps and up again before coming to rest. The Bride of 1958 shows no such indecision. Spreading her skirt, she seems to establish residence, and Glushanik gets his close-up when she strokes Noguchi's slender chair with a fervency that implies she's rejoicing in its solidity. The phallic illusion may be accidental, but it's almost inevitable. Even though her tipped-over arabesques suggest risk in an unstable world, she's less panicky than the Bride of 1944, never really out of control. In the archival film, she rocks an imaginary cradle several times, quite roughly. In the later one, the camera offers a close-up of Graham's contracting torso, a curious directorial touch that both signals the onset of childbirth and highlights the principle of contraction and release on which Graham's style is based. Both times the bride, the later one with a baby in her arms, gestures toward where the husbandman stands, but he doesn't acknowledge her. It's integral to the style of the piece that when a character performs a dance soliloquy, the others freeze as if time has stopped for them. In the end, both brides have conquered their fears and sit, well pleased with themselves, in their new house and their new life.